possible world. And that, I would say, I don't believe so.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of atheists and perhaps even Christians make this mistake by saying, well, God would only ever make the quote unquote best possible world. But I think there's this weird notion that there's only like one, good outcome. There's only one good possibility. Like only this world could have been good. I'm like, no, God has freedom. So maybe there were equally good options of worlds to make. Like maybe there were just equally great options of worlds to make. And God said, out of all of the trillions of great options, I'm going to choose to make this kind, right? And that's okay. I think people assume, oh, well, a perfect being would only make one option because there's only one, perfect or at least maximally great choice. I'm like, no, you could have like many maximally great options in different ways. And so I think that's very silly. And then also omnipotence means being able to do all things, right? All like logically coherent things. Well, things that are illogical, as in go against the laws of logic, just so everybody in the comments who are saying things about like, oh, God's bound by logic. Well, logic, the laws of logic are just laws of the nature of being. It's not that the laws of logic were created, they're the expressions of how things exist, right? And so since God makes things and God has the ability to do all things, well, illogical contradictions are not things, so not a thing for God to make. A square circle, a married bachelor, et cetera, et cetera. So since those are not things, because again, the laws of logic deal with the way things can exist, those things cannot exist. Therefore, God could not make them, right? Because they're illogical. God does not make nonsense. And there's a lot of other issues he said, but it's just too much to address right now. It's just too much.
I think for me, I think this all comes back to him having the, I guess, fantasy, I'd almost say, of being able to judge God and to determine what God should have done. And he should have built a world that he would have approved of. God is not a slave.
With his very finite, imperfect knowledge, he thinks that he knows that a better world could be created. Yeah, but that wasn't even the prompt, right? That has nothing to do with the prompt, right?
At all. Yeah, hardly any of this conversation has had anything to do with the prompt at all.
Insane.
He has completely wasted Jordan's time. It's wasted our time. It's all been garbage.
Making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Well, it just means that the free will defense fails.
I don't think
all this, under your view,
if you want to have it fail, no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue.
Do you acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more clearly so that someone like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that world...
Inevitable doesn't mean determined.
It's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make it determined.
Causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
Okay.
That's not the case.
Okay. So again, Jordan is so close to actually pulling them back on topic. Please get them back on topic when you can, because it's like, I don't know how that's relevant to topic. And then you let the guy continue going off in this rabbit trail. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, pull him back to the topic.
Yeah. So this is a skill. Right? Peterson probably hasn't done a number of these things where he's talking to just ordinary people who don't understand rules of debate and so on and so forth. I have, right? I have lots of experience doing this and talking to Muslims mostly, but occasionally atheists and others. And so Peterson, I think, needs to learn the skill of pulling people back on topic. But I will say that, even though he allows people to go on other topics, he does generally, and in this case, answer their questions, right? He does answer their accusations, or however you want to say it. I think he gave a perfectly valid answer when he said he doesn't know if God could create other worlds, which is actually a defeater of the guy's argument, right? So the guy's argument is that it's implicitly necessary that God could have created a better world, basically. And Peterson says, I don't know. Not as strong as answer as he possibly could give, but it is sufficient to defeat the guy's point.
I fully agree. I really do. I think this notion of what God couldn't could not have done outside of things that are like literally logically impossible, because that's not a limit on God. That's an expression of God's nature. You know, the laws of logic are expressions of the nature of being. God is being, therefore those are just expressions of how he does things. But outside of that, I just think it's silly to change the prompt to something completely unrelated, because clearly this guy has just been starving for conversation with a Christian philosopher, and instead he got Jordan Peterson, which is not the same thing. Not the same thing, right? So perhaps I do feel bad for this guy, because clearly he wants to talk to somebody, but he just hasn't really had a chance to do that. So maybe that's something. But just as a final note, I think he's so confused about the actual like consistent historic claims about Christians and omnipotence and omniscience, that he thinks the only understanding of God is something akin, and I don't mean any slight by this, okay, to anyone watching, but to a more like deterministic version of God, right? So there's Christians who have a more deterministic view of God, and this would be a good critique of them if they believe that all is determined. But outside of that, there's a ton of Christians throughout church history and Christian history and even Jewish history that would say that no, not everything is determined. God has some events determined. Even open theists would say that. They'd say that God has determined some events, perhaps even most events, but then God has also determined some events to be undetermined, right? And based on human free will, as per Jeremiah 18, Jeremiah 19. If a nation repents, then I will relent of the judgment which I had promised unto them. And then in that same chapter, Jeremiah 18, God says, and if I promise blessing unto a nation and they act wickedly in my sight, then I relent of the blessings I promised unto that nation. Notice this is conditional. It literally means God desires to see the response of a nation so as to allow certain outcomes to come about. And so, even open theists could offer some things are determined and other things are not. Calvinists and determinists would say all things are determined, but there's more options than just determinism. And I think that's very silly to say, because determinism is wrong, therefore all of Christianity is wrong. I'm like, well, no, because not all of Christianity is deterministic.